Welcome everybody. We are now live on air and this is Virtually Connecting. We're coming from the final day of the altc conference in Liverpool in the UK, and we have yet again a dream team on site and a dream team virtually connecting to question and to connect with the keynote speakers. It is the 7th of September 2017. We're going to start off with some introductions. So my name is Teresa McKinnon. I'm at Warwick Language on Twitter. And the folks in the room over at altc, I'm going to start off with you and ask you to introduce yourselves to the room, please.
Well, I'll just start. I'm just going to be in and out camera. I'm Sheila McNeil. I'm the on-site buddy. And yeah, I'm just going to let, as you say, this fabulous dream team introduce themselves and lead the discussion. But great to be here and to see everybody again.
Hi everybody, I'm Maren Deepwell. I'm one of the organisers of Run the Association, and this is our 24th annual conference, and really looking forward to talking with all of you virtually connecting. Welcome.
Hi there, my name is Laura Campbell. I work at the University of Edinburgh and I'm a member of the board of ALT. I'm here to provide social media coverage for the conference, so I'm the one who's been tweeting the keynotes from the ALT Twitter account.
Hello, it's Anne-Catherine Matola, and it's my first time as an on-site buddy, so I'm really excited. I've joined virtually, but not on-site, so I'm really grateful to be here.
I am Peter Goodyear from the University of Sydney, and just recovering from having given the keynote from our fire alarm.
Hi, I don't know if I'm Linda Creanor from Glasgow, Caledonia University, Professor of Digital Learning, interested in things like curriculum design for online blended learning and particularly at the moment digital assessment.
Fabulous. Lovely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to come across from for the virtual participants, and maybe we could start with Rissa, who's joining us at again very early o'clock. Rissa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hi, sorry.
That's great, thanks.
It's just a little bit weird. Okay, so hi, I'm Clarissa Sorensen Unruh, and I work in Albuquerque, Mexico, where it is currently 5 a.m. And I teach chemistry, and I also work at the University of New Mexico, and I'm a graduate student in learning sciences. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Great. Colin, can we come across to you next?
Sure. I'm Colin Simpson. I'm an education designer at the Australian National University in Canberra.
Lovely. Thank you for joining us.
9
That's
PM.
great. 9 p.m. Okay, so we're at the other end of the spectrum. Graham, perhaps you could introduce yourself now.
Sure. My name is Graham Steele from Glasgow in Scotland, as you can possibly tell from my accent. I'm generally interested in open science. I'm also interested in open things generally, such as open educational resources. And I've followed the ALT conference before, but I'm still catching up on my knowledge about what you guys are up to, so it's been quite interesting.
Thank you, that's great. And Simon, somehow I've done this in alphabetical order without meaning to, but Simon.
Hello everybody, I'm Simon Ensor. I'm an English teacher over in Clermont-Ferrand in France, right in the middle of France.
Fabulous, thank you. So altc is in its final day, and as you know, with Virtually Connecting, what we like to do is to give keynote speakers and participants who haven't been able to actually physically attend a conference a chance to understand and get a feel for the nature of the conference. So maybe as it's the last day, it's kind of a good day to reflect a little bit on how things have been going. And Maren, I know you're very much at the chalk face here in terms of making it all happen and come together. Maybe you could start us off by giving us a feel for how things have been going this year.
Sure. Well, today was a really exciting morning, maybe more exciting than you've been bargaining for. We were here on site just as Peter came to the really inspiring conclusion of his keynote, the fire alarm went off. So it is one of the mornings when risk assessment training comes to the forefront and evacuating to the nearest exit was necessary. So we had a very interesting morning. So for me, that's probably today's most memorable moment. But I think for me this year, the conference has been really exciting in terms of the international and diverse attendance. I think we have a lot of young learning technologists, professionals coming in, a lot of people joining us from across Europe and across the world, with delegates from really far-flung places, including Australia and Hong Kong and New Zealand. So that's really encouraging. I also think, for me, in our keynotes this year, there's been a really sort of sustained effort to use research and use the evidence base to leave us with a more hopeful perspective of what we can do in terms of empowering others to use learning technology and enable learners to use it responsibly. And empowerment is one of the things I'm personally really interested in. So I think that's been a really interesting perspective for me. It's sort of, interesting to have people's opinions, but I think this year it's been a very rich, sort of research-grounded lineup, and I've really enjoyed that. So apart from meeting 400 people who all say hello to me and really engaging, which is obviously brilliant, that's what I've really enjoyed.
That's fabulous, thank you. And yes, good. Empowerment is one of those words that, yeah, I'm very addicted to, and I share Peter's perspective, I think, on the engagement word. Peter, what really excited me about listening to your keynote was the fact that you brought the micro and the macro together and gave us the opportunity of thinking about how we connect perhaps more effectively as learning technologists with what's happening at the micro level, at the teacher level within classrooms, and how that it connects well with what's going on maybe at decision maker level that many of us don't have any access to. I wondered maybe if you could give us some of your thoughts perhaps of that keynote, and whether you think people will have got to grips with it and where it's going to lead us next maybe.
Sure, yeah.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, everybody. Sorry the last session overran. So.
No worries. Good to have you there. Thank you.
I've picked up loads of phrases along the way as well.
So, yeah, just while people are settling in, I think a couple of thoughts, really. One of them is to do with relationships between research and practical work in learning technology, and it seems to me that's a space that is still very unsettled, probably should continue to be unsettled in a way, but where I don't think have many very well worked out ideas about how that should proceed. And partly I think in learning tech we inherit that a bit from educational research more generally, and there's a great uncertainty and many gaps between the practice of researchers and the practice of practitioners. So partly I've come to where I am by thinking about research in much more pragmatic ways, and thinking, well, if you want your research to be, or if you want research to be more useful to practitioners, then start by looking at the nature of practitioners' work and when evidence or forms of knowledge can actually plausibly make a difference to what they do. And that's one of the reasons that I was drawn towards design rather than, say, studying interactive teaching in the classroom, because there's much more opportunity in planning and designing phases of educational work to incorporate new ideas and to incorporate evidence and so on. There's much more opportunity to do it then than in the heat of classroom decision making. We know from studies of classroom decision making in schools particularly that very few reasoned decisions are made during any one lesson. A lot of what's done is built on routine and habit. So that's, for me, one of the reasons why design is a good focus, and trying to understand the way that knowledge can flow from research on learning or research on technology into design has attracted me. And I guess the talk this morning then was looking at complex learning spaces as really a ground or a context in which to examine some of that argument, or to make some of that argument, and look at some of the issues to do with useful knowledge in relation to complex learning spaces. I think in the months that I was thinking about the talk, I was thinking, well, how shall I frame this? Because historically, learning technology has not been that interested in physical space. In a way, it's partly defined itself as about overcoming physical space. And yet, by the time I'd found out about the altc on learning spaces and seen the kinds of things that people were talking about, it seems to me it's a no-brainer, really, that the physical and the digital merging and interpenetrating. And I'm not going to say Internet of Things, but just this. Got it wrong again. Fell into my own trap. But it seems to me there isn't a logical basis for restricting the field of learning technology to the digital. The world is not moving that way, and it's timely to be thinking about design and design knowledge, where the objects of design have that complexity that comes with seeing digital tools in their physical locale, or thinking about technology-enabled spaces, or actually seeing it all as much more complex than that and harder to pull apart. So that's the kind of gist of it to me. And to go back to that point about linking the micro and the macro, again, one of the reasons I've been looking at design practice in other fields is it seems to me that they've often had to work out ways of connecting detail to big picture stuff. And if you look at architects, for example, they're often doing that, flipping very rapidly from broad brush stuff or thinking about the economics of building, cost envelope and so on, down to resolving fine details of how a door works or whatever. And I don't think we've got those kinds of capabilities yet in education or in higher education, but it seems to me essential that we make progress on that, working up and down the levels, if you like.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And I'm seeing in the text chat, Clarissa echoing that, yeah, this very much ties up with what she's doing in her design-based research class as well. So it's obviously been equally inspiring for her. And I thought it was a brilliant keynote, and it's definitely one I should be coming back to and going through with a fine-tooth comb. So big thanks from me for that. Guys, if there are any of you virtual participants who would like to ask something of the people in the room, or perhaps their reflections on the conference so far or their contributions, please do dive in. Awkward pause. Okay, so in which case, if without taking the lead from Simon, go ahead.
I'm just hot off the presses of a conversation I had this morning with a colleague teacher, and we've been talking about how to position ourselves as reflective practitioners, and the question of the word research. And I was using a research survey as the starting point for conversation. And one of the top questions was, what is your attitude to research and researchers? How can they help you in your practice? And after discussion, I was feeling unhappy about this survey altogether, and I blogged about it. And I said, what do you feel about this question? And she said to me, let's just stop using the word research and researcher, because as soon as you say that, then you introduce an idea of distance with the practitioners and teachers, and also a question of power differential, because you're positioning yourself as an expert. And this also, once you start using language, which you will find in scientific papers or in conferences, often people immediately will be terrified by that and start getting defensively aggressive. And I'd be interested how you guys feel, how you actually go about having relationships with practitioners, we're all practitioners, as regards who you are.
I think that's a constant tension, I think, in any kind of educational development. That, you know, the research side, I think it goes back to what you were saying, Peter, about design, there's research and there's practice, that understanding of what happens and what evolve in your everyday practice. So I think there's the whole idea, obviously, action research is something I know that I think most, certainly professional development courses around learning and teaching, trying to foster that. But I think the one thing about, I suppose, going back to what Maren was saying about this conference actually having a very strong research base, I think actually that's where an organisation like ALD and these conferences can actually help and bring people together and sort of help in a bit bring the distance, close some of the gaps. But I think it's something that has to be negotiated. That goes back to kind of professionalism as well, and how you think of yourself, because are we not all researchers in some way? So I think there's a lot of definitions, but there's a lot of cultural things wrapped up around that as well. But it's a very good question.
And I'm not sure I've seen such a strong distinction between the two. Now, I see myself, I suppose, primarily as a practitioner working with education, but I think any research has got to be situated in practice, otherwise it's pointless. So I don't know, maybe it's just the way that I work in, but I think that because open education is always developing, I think there's kind of it's like she said, there's an action research aspect to that is just ongoing. Maybe it is slightly different from other domains of education technology, other domains of education, but certainly I think within education I don't see there's such a big sort of divide between the practitioner and the researcher. I think we're both. I don't know what Martin feels.
Well, I wouldn't want to get rid of the word research, because then you might just have people saying opinion equals research. We've already gone down that path with opinion equals fact, and so I don't want to reinforce that. And I think I've really liked the keynote. All three keynotes this year have had a kind of strong research basis, and sometimes keynotes are just opinion. So I like that sort of strongly. But I think it does link into practice as well.
I think actually the research, the research that Shambine presented, which was looking at student use of Yik-Yak on campus, that was something students were doing anyway. They were already doing that. And Shannon's unit chose to research it because they realised that was kind of like current practice among students, and they wanted to explore issues of anonymity and identity that were being enacted through that practice that was actually already ongoing. So I think that's kind of like, that was a really useful and interesting way to do the research. There was, it's something that was already happening.
I think we do. So.
I'm just going to say, both Sheila and I work extensively with academic colleagues within our institution. And if you're trying to persuade someone to try a new approach to learning and teaching, then it does have much more weight if you've got some evidence behind it. So bringing the research in, but presenting it in a way that's accessible without using sort of esoteric terms to describe it, I think can be really helpful in engaging people. It gives what everyone's doing that added credibility. I think we're all trying to become reflective practitioners. So to introduce people to your own research and other people's can be helpful in encouraging them to become reflective about their own practice. So it all comes together.
I was just going to add, I think for me there is a third piece to the puzzle, as well as research and practice. I think there's policy, and I don't mean that just national policy or international policy, but also within an institution or even just from a strategic point of view for an individual. And I think that my hope is that for this conference there is actually a conversation between these three elements. And our title is about, how learning technology is becoming more normal for all staff at different levels. And I think that includes policymakers and heads of institutions. One of the co-chairs, I don't know if she's joined virtually connecting this year, but Helen O'Sullivan is really passionate about that. And that's why she, as a pro-vice chancellor at Liverpool University, has volunteered to be a co-chair, because she sees that connection. So I think that's a really important element maybe to add to your consideration, whether it's not just research and practice, but also policy.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your micro and macro levels as well. And I think sometimes there's just a gap. Although things are changing, I think sometimes for teaching practitioners, sometimes it is difficult to see where that research fits in and how that fits in kind of the different levels of where they are. And I think that's something that, and that's what I was, some work I'm doing around this as well, but I was really pleased to see that in your talk in terms of design as well, and, you know, extending that conversation into spaces, because at the macro level, we're talking about learning spaces. And it's just like, well, we have to functionally get how many rooms we need. And there's not really enough discussion about, well, what's actually going to happen in the rooms and out of the rooms, and what are the rooms, you know, how are they going to be? Instead, and I think Bonnie mentioned that, you know, the kind of chair that's going to transform learning, the learning chair. You know, that's not really what it is.
Some of these chairs are weird.
So, but, you know, that kind of just, you know, that should be higher up. And I think it goes back to your point about maybe, yeah, and I think sometimes what you're saying about architects, that's very true, but architects can sometimes do things that when you go into a room, you think, who the blooming heck designed this? You know?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I mean, I really do take the starting point, which is that we've not seen a successful relationship between research and practice in education. I don't think anyone's comfortable with how that works, but I've been drawn recently to kind of modes of inquiry and modes of analysing complex learning situations that are kind of generating knowledge from on-site action learning and action research would be one example of that. But I think one of my concerns, maybe I can flip it around and just say it's a challenge, is that I think to actually understand how complex learning environments are functioning and what students are doing in order to attain some of the more demanding learning outcomes that we hope for them, there's a real complexity to that. And too often coming from practice, we kind of deny that complexity. We deny, we don't see it so much as a complex problem that needs special modes of inquiry in order to make sense of what's going on. And so some of the methods that I've been looking at for analysing complex learning situations have been fundamentally about how do you get a group of people who are the key activists, the stakeholders or whatever in a situation to create a shared representation of the complex world that they're responsible for and that they want to improve. So it's kind of understanding inquiry is about building enough of a shared understanding of what's going on that people can agree how to change and what to change. And I think there's quite a fertile meeting ground there for practice and inquiry without needing to get tied up on who is doing what. I mean, it's much more about the practices and the tools and methods and outcomes than it is about positions and status.
I wonder if there's a culture, just going on, big national stereotypes here. I was going to ask you, being based in Germany, my sense is it's really less of a distinction between kind of research and practice in Germany. It's kind of a big engineering kind of culture, so they can see the two intertwined. Would that be true?
Yeah, it's really like what you said, Maren, earlier about, you know, how it's all fitting together and how especially the keynotes, how they're based in. That's really basically the norm in Germany, I would say, because you can't just, you know, do something without it being based on something more than, you know, your opinion. So it's really common, but it makes it difficult at the same time because you're not as flexible and just, you know, going out there and trying new things without doing, you know, the necessary research. So I think it's a good thing, but a bad thing also because it kind of limits you to what you have the evidence.
Right, yeah, and then you can't have it unless you do that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of, you know.
That's a really rich and welcome discussion there. Thanks very much, guys, for your thoughts. It kind of brings me to the Peter made the point about slow and fast thinking as well, and there's been a discussion in the chat around, you know, academics and practitioners and researchers, and, you know, thinking of myself as a practitioner, as a teacher first, that I very much recognise Peter's sort of rapid decision making and tweaking, and because when you're actually in the classroom, when you're actually engaged in something, you're having to use those fast thinking techniques, and how we maybe sort of pull these borders down so that teachers are not spending all their time in that fast thinking mode, and they get some time as well for the reflective practitioner aspect that Simon was mentioning. As a researcher, when I'm writing as well, I spend a lot of time in that slow thinking mode, and discussing and talking things through and questioning. And that's, you know, not a luxury of time that we get very often. But we all benefit, wherever our identity is, by spending time in both of those modes. So how do we somehow facilitate things, perhaps within, we get this sort of unintended consequences in a UK HEI setting, where actually we're pushed to self-identify as a teacher or as a research fellow, rather than actually accepting that we need a bit of both. So the really interesting discussion, guys. Thank you very much for that. Graham, I want to draw you in if I can. Do you have a question to pose for our gathered?
Yes, I've got a
thank you. Perfect.
Quick question for Peter. But yeah, it was obviously unfortunate with regards to the fire alarm, but thankfully it's occurred right at the end of your talk. I just wanted to ask, was there anything else that you wanted to say the remaining time that you had? Think of that as a sort of open virtual question.
The one thing I most wanted to say was a shout out to Pippi Oman, who I've done a lot of this work with, and I thoroughly recommend her website. And just Google for Pippi Oman. She's been doing a lot of work from an anthropologically informed perspective in schools and in higher education. And I think if you're a lucky supervisor, you learn an awful lot, huge amount from your PhD students. She's taken me off into areas of reading in anthropology, archaeology, other kinds of areas that I wouldn't otherwise have gone into. So out of that, I think comes a recommendation from me to really venture out into those other areas of literature where people take stuff seriously, whether it's buildings or tools and artifacts and so on. I know this is Maren's background, so we were talking a bit earlier about this. I think there's a lot to be learned from some of those adjacent disciplines that education hasn't often drawn from.
I think it's important as well to realise that within these disciplines there's a great deal of debate about how they operate. My own background is archaeology, and certainly I'm still working in that domain right at the time. Big sort of post-processualism splits, and I think I would certainly recommend reading sort of out with your immediate discipline, but also to be cognizant that within those disciplines there can be quite sort of intense debate about, you know, how to structure those subjects.
And like Bonnie was mentioning at the start of the conference, and she and Sean as well had lots of quotes from other people's writing and blogs, and I think actually it's been a really nice way of starting to see how all these references come together at this conference. Yeah. And I think we've had lots of voices who weren't physically present, but their work acknowledged and quoted. So I think that's been really inspiring. Actually, my reading list is now substantial.
And if I could just chip in there again, a sort of way, having manned the conference Twitter feed as well has been really helpful. That all the people have shared their slides and their references and their links.
Yes,
that's actually, I mean, it makes my life a lot easier as well. But that's been a hugely important resource, I think, to get out there to the community. Thanks to Peter and our other notes as well for doing that.
I think that takes us back to the previous question about the split between research and practice. I think we've now got access to so many openly available, really insightful pieces of work from blogs and wikis and Twitter feeds and the open access journal from Alt, obviously, with all the research articles there. So there's so much there that everyone can access, and particularly with the social media channels, that they are very accessible. They're not written in sort of difficult academic language. So there's lots there that people can be encouraged to engage with the evidence and thinking from key people in the field. I think that's really useful and something that all helps to
I'm kind of aware that, well, as we've seen, Martin's quietly made his way out of the room to catch his train. So bye, Martin. But there's one question I'd like to ask the gang at altc before they disappear, and that is if you could encapsulate what has happened. And it sounds to me there's been a very rich and much needed within academia opportunity to discuss interdisciplinary matters and to move the discussions forward, sort of mediated by the discussions around technology in learning. If you can encapsulate your alt experience in a Beatles song, seeing as you're in Liverpool, what would it be?
I've got one, and I'll just say it first because
Yay!
All you need is alt.
Love it. Love it.
I want to hold your hand. I think it's bringing people together and sharing, and also when we go back to what we do in our own institutions, I think that encapsulates that as well.
Well, given that I'm one of the organisers, I think my choice is going to be It's a Hard Day's Night.
Oh, Maren, I hope you get a long night to sleep it all off.
Okay, what happens when the room doesn't go out?
I had not the Beatles by John Lennon, which is Imagine, because when I came to Liverpool Airport, you know, everybody everywhere was written Above Us Only Sky, and that was for me kind of like the start of the conference, because what Maren said in the intro of the first day, you know, listen to everybody has a voice, and be open to the ideas that come across, and so that's kind of for me, you know, Above Us Only Sky. So it's kind of been for me a motivation to, you know, start dreaming or continue dreaming again. Yeah, it's a bit cheesy, but yeah.
It's a great choice, and it's an earworm you're going to leave us with.
My one's quite a personal one. It's when I'm 64. I turned 65 this year, so the idea of will you still need me, will you still feed me?
We will. Fabulous. Simon and the virtual participants, do you have any contributions before we let these poor guys go and get back into the sway of the last part of the conference?
On the Beatles front, I'm going to go for here, there, and everywhere.
Yes, definitely good choice.
Well, for me, I hesitated, but the one that keeps coming up is Blackbird.
Oh, do you know what? That's my favourite Beatles song ever. So
I think that's probably my favourite one.
kind of obscure, but yeah, it fits somehow. So Sheila, I'm aware you guys need to go, so I'm going to stop the broadcast, but the rest of us can continue to hang on. And thank you so much for taking time out of a very busy conference to join us. It's been an absolute delight to see you, and it makes me feel a little bit closer to altc. And I'll continue to catch up on the various virtual streams that we have out there. Thank you very much for joining us and for offering this insight into the conference, which will be on the blog as well for virtually connecting. So thanks all very much for your time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.